Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience with us. We were letting the rain kind of die down a little bit so a little bit more people could filter in, which is why my right foot currently feels like I stepped in a pool. So my name is Devin Phillips. I'm one of the pastors here at the community church, and so I'm so thankful for you being here with us today. I think this is a very important program for anyone. Regardless of state of life or age, in seminary, I took a class on death and dying, and one of the assignments was putting together all the documents you would need for, in case of your passing, your spouse or loved one or whoever would be able to access your accounts and everything. And so putting together all those documents, and then when we had kids, we put our wills together of who would get kids in case something happened or anything like that. It really is a good stewarding of your resources and your time, because having walked as a pastor through some people who have lost in the last couple years, it saves a lot of stress and a lot of heartache and a lot of long days having to be on the phone with creditors, be on the phone with companies. And so this is a great resource. The information you're about to hear today could cost you several $100s getting it from somewhere else. And so I'm thankful for the local churches, Christ Our Savior, Lutheran, St. Shepherd of the Lake, and then St. Thomas Catholic, for all partnering together. And I'm thankful for the congregational care team here at the community church for hosting this. And so if you see any of those people around, if you're on the congregational care team, would you raise your hand? Okay, so we got Julie, and I see another hand back there, a couple hands. And so thank you for your help and your service for this. And I'll pray for us real quick. And as we get going, I'll introduce our first speaker. And I would ask that if you hold all your questions, I'm sure some things are going to generate, and so in your mind. So if you would, write those down, and you can ask questions at the end. And if you wouldn't mind checking your cell phone and making sure that's turned off so that won't be a disruption at some point. Well, let us pray. Almighty God, we praise you for all that you are. You are so good. You are so glorious. You are so holy and righteous, and so we praise you. God, you entrust us with so many blessings. You are the source of life. You are the source of those blessings. And so we thank you today for all that you've given us, all that you've entrusted us with, our time, our talents, our lives. God, give us wisdom today. Give us wisdom to steward what you've entrusted us with here on this earth and coming into the next life. Let your Spirit be present with us as some of us have walked through this journey. Others are going to be walking through this journey. So God, I pray that your Spirit would be present. Allow us to be good stewards of your gospel, good stewards of the resources you've given us. Father, we ask for your life to dwell within us, and we pray that you would be on this time today. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Well, at this time, I would like to invite Ben Campbell. He's a financial advisor at Edward Jones. If he would come up, and he's going to share a few words on, I'm assuming, financial planning. Is that right? Okay, we can talk afterwards because I got some questions on my own.
Thank you, Devin. I'm very nervous in front of crowds, so if I'm stuttering, it is an actual stutter. I apologize. I'm gonna start with just a little bit of background on myself. Undergraduate degree in finance, a master's in business. I'm a chartered retirement planning counselor. I work for Edward Jones just across the road. I used to run a manufacturing facility for about 10 years before I changed careers about 6 years ago and began to do what I do. And I do it because I enjoy helping folks. And I think this is a wonderful thing today. I'd be remiss if I didn't say accolades to Stay in Teleco Village for all that they do for this awareness for the community. It's just such a great thing that needs to be done in every community. I'm very blessed to have Loren and Janie behind me here that are a viable part of my process for a lot of my clients through the retirement planning process. They add a lot of value, and they're local, and that's just, it's hard to put a value on that. I'd like to take a moment and emphasize how important relationships are throughout this process. We're all professionals, and there are many of us, many financial advisors, many lawyers, many end-of-life planning businesses. And you've got to have trust in that partnership that you have, because we can all tell you different things, and you've got to have confidence that what we tell you is in your best interest and in your family's best interest and in your successor's best interest. So just a moment to put a value on the relationship that comes about with this whole process. You've got to have a strong relationship and a strong trust level for all the folks that you deal with throughout this process. Every need is custom to each individual when it comes to retirement planning, living in retirement. But what is common are some of the pitfalls that can occur throughout the process. Let's take a moment and talk about assets. With assets, it could mean an array of things. For a lot of us, it means our property. It means our bank accounts at United Community or BB&T, wherever they're held. It means our investment accounts, wherever they're held. And let's talk about the design of the assets and then how they work throughout this process of end-of-life planning. When your mind is fully functioning, it's a lot easier to know what you want these assets designed for, designed to do beyond your capacity. When you reach the level of incapacity, that's when you really need help. Maybe it's a trust, maybe it's a power of attorney. Loren will be more specific when we talk about some of these documents that you can have throughout processes when you do become at a point in time deemed necessary where they become active. But let's say you have your portfolio today, portfolio meaning assets, whether it be through stocks, mutual funds, bonds, CDs. Do you know what it's designed for? Is it designed for income? Do you want it to stay designed for income throughout your journey? Do you want it to change to another designation at a point in time when you feel your income needs are met, and then beyond, it's a legacy planning horizon? Those are the questions you need to be very familiar with. You need to know. You need to talk to your planner and say, what are my assets doing for me? Do I have growth assets and stocks and mutual funds oriented towards growth? Do I have annuities with income riders on them, or death benefit leverages? All kinds of annuity riders out there, and you need to know what yours does. So these are the questions that you need to be very familiar with when it comes to my segment of this conversation. You need to know what your assets are there for, what the intention is going to be when you're gone, and to make sure that they're following the path of your intentions. It's pretty dynamic, so those conversations can take a while, and you guys know having conversations with your financial planner is not always very exuberating. So I do suggest you take the time and go through the mundane series of discussions to make sure it's laid out the way you intend it to be laid out. Let's talk about annuities for just a minute. In your retirement years, your long-term care needs are going to be something that you've probably all talked about, thought about, maybe even have policies on. So long-term care, this is all very dynamic, and I'm going to be honest. I'm going to learn from this session, and I'm going to refine this talk. If I'm asked to come back, what an honor to be here. And I'm going to make sure that it's pertinent to the things that you have. But let's go broad scope for a bit and try to talk about some of the products that are out there that you need to be familiar with. Long-term care is something that if 2 of your 6 ADLs become inactive, which means it could be cognitive, bathing, transferring, walking, driving, those type things. 2 of those become inactive, you could initiate a long-term care policy. Those policies are going to cover an array of percent of. For example, you could be covered for $3,000 per day with your long-term care policy. So in your minds, as you're planning throughout this journey you're going on, where does the remaining 40% come from? If you're covered 60, where does the remaining 40 come from? Those are the plans you need to have laid out from a cash flow perspective in retirement. And the thing that's tricky with that is inflation, right? Inflation, we're not sure what inflation is going to do over the next few years, but we know it's going to be there, probably bigger than we've seen it the past decade. Sorry, Is this a little better? I apologize. Could everyone hear what I was saying the first 5 minutes? Sorry. Inflation. So long-term care products typically have inflation designs that will cover you for a % of inflation as well. But one thing to just note is to take your cash flow stream, look at your long-term care policies if you have one, and then determine where the remaining % of is going to come from with those needs in long-term care situations. Back to the annuity conversation. Some annuities that you may have purchased in the past have income riders. Some of those income riders will be enhanced with a long-term care need. So hypothetically, if you had a 5% income rider based off the principal, some of them, if you were going into skilled nursing care or something that required 2 of the 6 ADLs to be activated, will actually leverage that income rider up to, say, a 10% number. So be familiar with your products that you've purchased in the past, know what they'll do for you. Sometimes you would waste that extra benefit that you're paying maybe 20, 30 basis points on an annual basis. So be very familiar with the products that you have. Another thing about annuities, there's lots of riders that you could purchase with an annuity. So some have death benefits that are leveraged throughout life with market growth. Be familiar with how that works and how it works with passing on as taxes to your beneficiaries. You need to be familiar with that so that they could be prepped for what happens if they are to inherit a leveraged death benefit through a non-qualified asset. By non-qualified, I mean not qualified to be taxed. So another thing to look for in your assets, a lot of fixed income assets have what you call an estate feature. And with an estate feature, your beneficiary can inherit that asset at the par value upon your passing. So that's valuable because they would have the option to take the asset at market value upon your passing, or take the par value that you had purchased it back 4 years ago, typically a $5,000 increment. So be familiar with estate features in your fixed income assets. Another thing to look at in financial planning in stages of life, Social Security planning is extremely important. Things that people don't consider sometimes. Social Security is easy when you're both alive and you're both receiving what your primary insurance amount, they call it PIA, is typically full retirement age. But what happens if one of you pass away? One of your income streams is gone. Moreover, you typically receive the higher of the two. That's a benefit. But still yet, you're missing part of that income stream that you had for so many years. So you have to be prepared to supplement that from some of your assets. There could be a number of ways to supplement that, but you have to be prepared for it, and you have to be prepared for it in a long-term care need as well. A lot of times when we're planning for long-term care needs, we take income into consideration from 2 parties. So just be cognizant that Social Security planning, Social Security optimization is very important to have those discussions with a financial advisor, a financial planner, and make sure that you've got your cash flows optimized in a way, and you got to have different scenarios through scenario A, B, and C, for example. So we talk about forms, and Loren will be more specific with this, but a couple of things I want to talk about in regards to financial documents. One is a trading authority, for example. Raise your hand if you've heard of a trading authority form. Okay? Not many. Let me explain that just a bit. A trading authority, a trading authorization form is a written document similar to a limited power of attorney document. It allows account holders to authorize individuals as their agents and attorney in fact on the account. Those type authorizations are out there. This is just an awareness being created. Let's talk about a transfer on death form. A transfer on death form is a form that will allow you to pass your assets, typically in a brokerage account, non-IRA related account, to your beneficiaries without having to go through the probate process, which will save you lots of time and money typically. How does a TOD, a transfer on death agreement, work? It allows the distribution of assets upon the death of the TOD maker. It is specific and does not cover all related customer accounts. An agreement must be signed and completed for each account requesting the process. You've probably heard it called POD. Some banks call it payment on death. But just make sure all of your accounts are designated with the beneficiary. That's step one. And then when you have your annual reviews with your financial planner, make sure that you review those beneficiaries. Can't tell you how many times that we've reviewed in my business and said, oh, you know, I thought it was this way. So make sure that that's in part of every review that you have, looking at your beneficiaries to make sure they're designated and the percent of allocation that you require. Last thing in regards to accounts that I want to cover is FINRA had issued a new requirement. It's called a trusted contact, and it became effective February 5th, 2018, and applies to all FINRA member firms. So FINRA continues to review the protection of senior and other vulnerable investors as a top priority. Adults age 65 and older are more likely to be targeted for financial fraud and more likely to lose money once targeted. With the aging of the U.S. population, financial exploitation of seniors and other vulnerable investors is a serious and growing problem. The intention of the rule is to provide firms with an additional resource to better protect clients from financial exploitation. Some firms are opting to apply the rule only to senior investors. Our firm that I work for is applying it to all investors because of the vulnerability in regards to financial exploitation. So be familiar with that. You're probably going to get a call from your advisor that's going to ask you to designate a trusted contact, and it's for your safety. You may have had the phone call. If not, you probably will in the next few months, next 12 months anyways. Are you guys having fun? Couple of things on creating an estate plan. Once again, I'm going to be very generic here because this is out of my expertise. When someone comes in my office, we talk about investments and time horizons and risk tolerance and goals in regards to the financial investments. When they start talking about how they want these assets to be passed along to their beneficiaries, I typically send them across the road to Loren. So I'm going to be very generic here. I know enough to be dangerous. You should properly register your investment accounts by listing the correct individuals as the owners of each account. Make sure all names are spelled correctly. If you have a living trust, you should generally register the accounts in the name of the trust. A will. A will describes how your assets will be divided and distributed at your death. The document also names the persons who will manage your estate at your death. It is important to note that a will governs the disposition of assets held in your individual name only. It does not govern assets held as joint tenants. Those who designate a beneficiary or those held with a revocable trust, however, a will can ensure that your individually owned assets transfer at your death as your intentions. I want to just emphasize once again, beneficiary designation is crucial in each account review that you have. Make sure that the beneficiary designations are on the account and that the allocations are to your liking. So another housekeeping note in regards to financial organizing, I would call it, would be some folks have a couple of brokers. They have a couple of financial advisors. If that's the case, it's very pertinent for you to have a Excel spreadsheet or a handwritten sheet with all your financial whereabouts, your bank account, your multiple brokerage accounts. Because if you have one financial advisor, if they're doing their job, they're going to know who to get in touch with and your whole picture. That's an easy one. But if you have a couple, who's got the ball, right? No one really knows. So it's going to be up to you to make that list, have a designated person that you trust to know where that list is. And when I talk about financial wherewithal, I don't just mean investment accounts, bank accounts, insurance policies, your primary residence, any rental properties, anything that's of value to you and your family needs to be in a place that someone that you and someone else that you trust knows where it would be at if something were to happen to you. Once again, I feel like there's so much to discuss with the financial segment of this conversation, and this is a learning curve for me. I'm not sure what you really need at this point. This was going to be my first pass, and as I have questions at the end of this, I can come back and refine some of the message we deliver. So I'm going to conclude with these notes that I have given, and I just want to thank you for your participation today. I want to thank the Stay in Tellico Village program and the churches. This is just an awesome facility to allow us to use. It is my privilege to introduce my friend and someone I consider a partner in my retirement planning process, Loren Clemons.
Thank you so much, Ben. And he is a true friend and a great guy to work with. I am Loren Clemons. I am an attorney. I've been blessed to practice in East Tennessee for 35 years. I often say to my clients, how did you get here? How did you find Tellico Village? Because I was lucky enough to be born here, if you can't tell by my accent. But no, we're all blessed to be in East Tennessee, and thank you, Lisa, for the Tellico Village Property Owners Association for putting this on. The pastors of our churches who first saw this need to have a discussion, and of course Kathy Milam, who has been the bulldozer of making sure that this project is talked about and has never left her lips, I don't think, since the time it was first envisioned, that it's important for our community to stay together and be congruent as our lives change. And that is the one thing that we know that is certain in life, is that things will change. So why did the pastors and why did Kathy and why did TVPOA feel that this is necessary? Unfortunately, there have been many occasions when a family has had a health emergency and the healthy spouse or the children come in and literally just be clueless about what to do, what assets are involved, how will the bills be paid while their loved one is ill or has passed away. The pastors have been looked to help answer those questions, and of course that's not what they know, that's not what they do, but they do see the need. So with that being said, there are two criteria that's important when you're looking at planning in case of an emergency or planning in case of death of a loved one. And number one is we have to look at who is going to be your financial agent, who is going to be your health care agent. So let's turn the conversation now to who will take care of you should you not be able to take care of yourself. A financial agent is simply that. It can be the holder of your financial power of attorney. It can be the successor trustee on your trust. But the easiest way for me to bring this home to you is to think about who do you trust with your checkbook in the event you were in that horrible wreck. Now you're at NHC for a few months. Who's going to make sure that your bills are paid? Now, of course, the broad scope of what a financial agent can do and should do is beyond bill paying, but that's just the crux of it. So you need to think and you need to plan and you need to make sure that you have the proper paperwork in place to make sure that should you be incapacitated, that someone can sign your name. Someone can do your business. Someone can make arrangements for you. That can, again, be through a financial power of attorney, and that someone would be called an attorney in fact. Where I'm an attorney at law, if you hear the statement of who's your attorney in fact, that doesn't mean me, that means who can sign your checks. It can be a successor trustee. And then, of course, there's the healthcare aspect of it, which is as important, or perhaps more important, is who is going to be that person that can make healthcare decisions for you if you're unable to do so yourself. You always have the right and the authority to make your own healthcare decisions. However, should you be temporarily incapacitated or in some instances permanently incapacitated, there needs to be someone you trust in place to make those healthcare decisions for you. In Tennessee, we have two primary documents. One is the healthcare power of attorney, which does exactly what it sounds like. It allows someone to make decisions for you. And it can be as simple a decision as signing a form for you at the hospital if you've already been put under anesthesia, or it could be as complex as deciding what facility will be your rehabilitative facility or your skilled nursing home facility for the rest of your life. A little 2-page document does a whole lot. And you may assume that, well, your kids can just do that, or your spouse can just do that. Spouses get a little bit of a break in that area. However, your children do not. And with the HIPAA laws now, the healthcare facilities, and rightfully so, they want to see that piece of paper of who has the authority to speak for you. Now, if you don't have these healthcare powers of attorney, or if you don't have a financial power of attorney, what happens? The only thing that can happen is that there has to be a court order, and that's called a conservatorship. So should some of your brethren may just never want to face, the fact that we may become ill, or and we don't have our paperwork in place, then your spouse, maybe your children, could be a trusted friend, would come to me and say, we're going to have to get a conservatorship. What do we do now? And that involves your doctor, it involves guardian ad litem, and it's a process. It's not an inexpensive process either. So there are ways to take care of oneself, or have responsible people take care of you. But again, it's better to have your paperwork in place now, because if you need it and don't have it, the only way to get the proper paperwork is through the court system. And as been emphasized, there are other issues about how do you transfer your property upon your demise, or upon your family's, to your family, to your beneficiaries. The most important thing there is to know what assets you have. And in some ways you would think, now really? But yeah, it does happen that you don't know what you have, or your spouse may have inherited some stock from a loved one some time ago. That stock's still laying in now your deceased spouse's name. There's things that have to be done in order to transfer ownership of that stock from your deceased spouse to yourself. I have prepared, and it kind of dovetails in what you were handed out when you came in of the estate checklist, which is a nice 1-page synopsis of different lists that you can make. What I have done, which helps me and my clients, is to do a financial forensics of your own assets, of your own financial circumstances. I call mine family financial forensics, and I just like CSI, so I had to get that forensics in there. But basically what you're doing is you're making a list. What do you own? How is it titled? Who does it, does your spouse have access to it? Is it a retirement asset? If it's a retirement asset, who are the beneficiaries? Do you have annuities? Do you have life insurance policies? Are they jointly owned? There are just so many products out there. I know Ben just tapped, the little minuscule part about annuities. When clients come in to see me and we talk about annuities, there's a zillion products, and that's not what I know. I can tell you, though, is that you need to talk to your financial advisor and see, does that does that annuity flow to your spouse? Does it flow to your kids? Does it pay out until you die, then it stops? Does it cover long-term care? So many products, and they're all individual type contracts. And that's part of the reason we want to bring this to your attention is you need to write down, you need to tell a trusted person what you own, how is it titled, and who do you want it to go to. In our society today, believe it or not, there's like 25% of us that have a financial estate plan. And the other 75% just leave it to the wind. Well, if you leave it to the wind, in the olden days, that wasn't too hard. The state of Tennessee will tell you who your next of kin are and how the property is to be divided, which kind of works, but yet it really doesn't, because many of us have blended families, and what you assume may happen to your property, or maybe what you want to happen to your estate, isn't what's going to happen at all unless you have it written down in a trust or a will. Now let me explain. You've been married to your current spouse for 35 years, but you had your children by your former spouse decades ago. You don't even think about him or her anymore, long gone. But your children, of course, are there, and everybody loves one another, and there's not an issue. And your current spouse is your long-term life partner, and your goal is to make sure that he or she is taken care of for the rest of his or her life. And then let's say you want the assets split amongst your children and your spouse's children equally. Sounds fair, and nobody's getting left out. But if you don't have a cohesive estate plan in place, if you have the typical I love you wills of everything you have to your surviving spouse, and then what happens when your spouse does survive you, and now she or he has in her will that everything then goes out to his or her children. Your kids get disinherited, although that may not have been your plan. It may not have been your current spouse's plan. But there are unintended consequences. So as important as knowing what you own, you need to know how it will pass to whomever you want to give it to. My philosophy is, it's your property, you work for it, but it should go to whomever you decide, not what the state of Tennessee decides, or just assume that it's going to go the way you want it to, because there are some pretty serious presumptions there. But if you have a revocable trust or a will that you and your current spouse have worked together on an estate plan to make sure that that you're both taken care of, but that when you both have passed, where your property is going to go, then that can be done. And to me, that's the responsible thing to do. Having a decision about who your executor is going to be or who your trustee is going to be, if you have a trust, that can be just as important there. Thank you, Pastor. He's waving at me, so that means, hello, I'm about done. One thing that I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to Janie, because I learn something every time from Janie, that's for sure. But do think about the decision of whether you want to have an estate plan with a last will and testament, which means that goes through the probate court, or whether you want to have an estate plan with a revocable trust, which means all your assets can pass outside of the court process. And that's a discussion that you and your estate planning attorney should have, because there are many decisions to be made. There's not one right thing I would recommend to each, to everybody. Everyone has their individual needs and their individual goals, and those can be met. I thank you so much for your time and attention, and those 15 minutes surely do pass by quickly. I look forward to your questions, and now my friend Janie.
Thank you so very much. She spoiled my whole joke. I was going to start with how many of you were born and raised in Tellico Village. Nobody ever is, and there she is. She was born here. So was I, like Loren said, as you can tell, because the minute I open my mouth, folks can tell I'm native. But aren't we blessed to live in a place like Tellico Village? I, too, always want to say, how in the world, from all the places in the world, did you find Tellico Village? And the stories are so interesting. But I thank our church, and we asked Devin to call time on us, so he's not being mean to us. He's doing what we ask him to do. But we are so blessed to be here, and thank the folks who have put together Stay in Tellico Village and the people who have put this program together, because to me, the more you can know, the less frightening it is, whatever it is. And Loren tells me it's the natural progression that I go last. I'm not sure that's really true. Or it may be nobody wants to talk about this. I'm not sure. But anyway, I usually get last dibs on the program, but I really don't mind. Because what I have to talk to you about today is so very important. It's something not a one of us is going to escape. Do you ever hear people say, well, if I die, I'm going to do this if I die? Of course, being in my profession, I want to go, no, honey, it's not if you die, it's when you die. And we're all going to. That's just a fact. And when we can get beyond that and begin to start talking about things. I am Janie McCullough. I'm your village funeral director with Click Funeral Home. Click Funeral Home's been in Loudoun County since 1965. We plan to be here forever, but as we all know, forever can be different for different people. But we've been here in the village for 9 years. It seems impossible. Have most of you been to our facility? You know we're here in the village. I still occasionally have people say, I didn't even know you were out here. So that's what I'm here today for. I want you to know I'm not going to be asking for money from you. Sometimes I think when I walk to the mailbox, I'll see people in traffic go by and they put their head down. Like if they wave at me, they're going to die or something. It's not that way. Talking to me doesn't cause you to die, I promise. You're going to do it anyway. But the best thing we can do is talk about these things. I learned from my mother. I've been in the funeral business for about 20 years. But I learned from my mother when she and Daddy were ready to retire. She said, Daddy, let's sit down and let's plan all of this while we both have our minds and we both have our health and we can do it. And I think that is so very important that we talk about these things with each other. You can't believe the spouses who come to see me and they don't have a clue what their spouse wanted. They've never talked about it. It's not comfortable. I even myself not long ago took out all the paperwork and did my plan because folks were coming in and saying, well, have you done yours? I'm like, well, no, but I'm going to. I'm going to get around to it. But one day I thought, quit beating around the bush. Just put it together and put your plan together. So that's what I want our few minutes together today to be, is just exactly what you want to know. We're going to have open mic for questions in a few minutes. But I wanted to start with some of my most frequently asked questions. And the number one question when people come in to do pre-planning or just stop by for another question, what do I do if my loved one dies at home? What if in the morning you wake up and your spouse does not wake up? I even asked my husband that the other day, and he's heard me do this so many times. And I said, now, if I die, what do you do? And he's like, I call the funeral home. And I'm like, no, that's the wrong answer. So if in the morning one of you wakes and one of you doesn't, and there's no hospice involved, you pick up the phone and you call 911. Because in order for us to even pick up a body, to begin the preparation, to do a death certificate, somebody has to pronounce you legally dead. A long time ago, we could go to the home, pick up the body. Our medical examiner was Dr. Shea. He lived right up the hill from the funeral home. The hearse would go right out by his house, knock on the door. He'd come out. He'd go, yep, they're dead. And we could take them to the funeral home. That's how it worked. We can't do that anymore. Times have changed. So if there is no hospice involved, then you must call 911, and they will come to your home, take the body to the nearest hospital, which in Loudoun County, that's the hospital in Lenore City. If you're in Monroe County, they take you to Sweetwater Hospital. But that's where the death will be pronounced, and the hospital will call us. I want to preface my next few words with, I am not paid by any hospice facility. This is not for any benefit except for yours. But if you become ill, and it progresses to the point where your physician mentions hospice to you, please do it. I know none of us want to. When we hear the word hospice, we think it's a death sentence. No longer is that true. My sister-in-law's mother graduated from 3 different hospices before she ever passed away. But it's such a beautiful organization for what they do for you. And when you pass away, if you're under hospice, your spouse, your loved one, just picks up the phone, calls hospice. The nurse comes out, does the death pronouncement, and we can come to your home and pick up the body. That's just so much easier, if you can, than having all the commotion that goes along with having to be picked up, taken through the hospital. If you have to, you have to. But I had a friend of mine who was so hesitant. He said, Janie, I just cannot bring myself to go on hospice. And they had encouraged him to at the doctor's office. And I said, but Jack, it'll make it so much better on your wife. And I explained all this to him. He said, then sign me up. So just food for thought. If it comes to that point, don't be hesitant, because it's such wonderful how they take care of you. So if you die at home, you either call 911 or you call hospice. Well, out here, we're all from someplace else, right? And we go lots of other places and we travel. And I love being out here, because there are folks out here 85 and 90 years old still doing everything they want to do. I feel like a kid, so I like being here. But what if we're traveling? What if we're out of state and something happens to us? That's where I'm going to talk to you today about, if you'll just come and see me. I gave you a little packet. You have a form that looks like this. It's divided down the middle by 2 sides. Down that left-hand column is information that I would need to know for your death certificate. It's just information about you that's not going to change from now until kingdom come. It's not like on the right-hand side, it's kind of a work in progress. But the left-hand side is death certificate information. If you will fill that out, and if I am not your funeral home of choice, any funeral home in Tennessee has to have this same information. So you can fill that out, take it to your funeral home of choice. If you bring it to me, I'm going to give you a little card to carry in your wallet that says your arrangements have been made. Brings me to another point. There are 2 things you can do. One is pre-plan, one is prepay. If you walk into my office and say, we want to pre-plan our funeral home, I make a promise to you. I'm not going to twist your arm for any money. I'm not going to try to guilt you into spending any money with me. All I want is this little sheet with the information on the left-hand side. Because with that, if you're traveling, what would happen if you died out of state, you would be probably taken to a morgue somewhere at a hospital. They need to know who to call. And if you have that little card in your wallet, they can call us, and we'll take it from there. You don't have to worry about anything else. I can pull your file and say, well, this is what she wants, and we can begin to start making that happen. If your wishes, and you've put down on here, is your wishes are to be cremated, what I'm probably going to do is have you cremated wherever you pass away. It's easier with all the technicalities and the paperwork to have you cremated, say in Alabama, if that's where you are when you pass away, and then the cremains would be shipped back here to us. But none of that would happen till I would talk to your next of kin or your spouse. So we're not just going to grab you up and do that. But when you come in and sit down and talk with me, we're going to talk about that. And if that's okay with you, that will be our plan. So that's why it's so important that I know enough about you. Now, if you never come and see me and you die in California and we get a phone call from the morgue, we're going to do the same thing. We're still going to take care of getting you back here. It's just easier if I know what your wishes are and how you want them carried out beforehand. So that's what would happen if you died out of state. Do I have to be embalmed? Here in Tellico Village, we are probably 95 to 97% cremation. I read an article once that said folks with roots tend to bury, and folks who've moved away from their family roots tend to cremate. If you cross over the bridge that's finally done and get into that mess in Lenore City, but at the funeral home in Lenore City, they're probably 60% burial and 35% cremation, just a difference in the makeup of the population. But out here we do a lot of cremation. That's not to say by any means you have to be. We can get a body back to any state. What you do is fly cargo on Delta Airlines, and it costs about $600. So I never want people to think, oh, we can't afford to send grandma back or we can't afford to fly back. You certainly can. It's affordable, and we'll make all those arrangements and help you with that. But if you're going to be flown somewhere, if you're going to travel on common carrier, then you do have to be embalmed. If you're going to be cremated, you do not have to be embalmed. A question I have asked a lot, and it happens in our community, my husband died, my kids all live far away, we don't want embalming, we don't want any of that, but my daughter's not seen her dad in 5 years and she really wants to see him, what can we do? We don't require you to use embalming. If she can get here in a day or two, we'll keep him cool. Is that gentle? We'll keep him somewhere where he's real cool. And then if she wants to come one day, we'll make it available where your kids can come. He will only be maybe on a gurney with a sheet, but you can still come and see your dad the last time before he's cremated. So there are lots of options there. If you're going to fly on public airlines, then you do have to be embalmed, unless it's against your religious beliefs. And then we use a little thing called dry ice and still make it work, which can be challenging sometimes. But no, you do not have to be embalmed. If you're going to have a public viewing, you have to be embalmed. If people are going to walk around and see you and everything, then you must, no, legally you don't have to, but you're just going to want to be if you're going to have a public viewing. Then we get to this question that a lot of people are interested in. Who can authorize my cremation? Listen, I'm going to do you like I do my kids. Listen to me real carefully here because it's important you know this. As long as you have a spouse, your spouse is the person who can authorize your cremation. As long as there's still two of you, you're in good shape. Just don't die together. But the other one can authorize your cremation. So then we've got that covered. But the moment you become a single person, or if you are currently a single person, it's a whole nother ball of wax. In the state of Tennessee, it's not true in every state. We had one of these meetings at another church locally, and this man was so mad at me because he said I spend part of the time in Florida and part of the time in Tennessee, and it's not that way in Florida. I said, well then, sir, with all respect, you better be sure you die while you're in Florida. Because in Tennessee, if you die without a spouse, all of your children have to sign that cremation form if you have biological children. If you have 2, if you have 5, if you have 12, we have to try our best to find them, chase them down, and get this form signed. All this can be done ahead of time too, but that's just so that you'll know. If you have absolutely nobody, then your power of attorney for health care that Loren was talking about, because it says in her health care powers of attorney that person can decide what to do with your body. Then if we've asked you or we've asked your family and everybody says there is absolutely nobody, then we can back up and use your power of attorney. So another good reason to have those documents where somebody can sign for your cremation. If we don't have anybody who can sign for your cremation, we either have to go to court as well and get a court order that we can cremate you or bury you. It's kind of funny, but we can bury anybody without anybody saying it's okay. But you can't cremate. And if you think about it, you'll understand, because once you cremate, you can't take it back. You know, it's a done deal. There's even a little place on our form where we have to explain that to you. Cremation is final disposition. Once it's done, it's done. So just be sure that you know who that person is. Usually when I'm with a couple, and let's say he has passed away, and I had a case this morning, and she was sitting with me, I'm like, now, let's take this paperwork home with you while your children are here. And I know it sounds morbid, but while they're all together, let's sign this paperwork and put it in your file. And 100 years from now, when we need it, we'll have it. But it's on their minds, and they're here, and they know that's what you want. So that's just kind of the way we work it. Then we get to the part, can my final arrangements be pre-planned? And yes, 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 and yes. That would be my story and my song if I could get everybody to do that ahead of time. I know some of you out here have experienced it with it having been planned ahead of time. Some of you have not. But if you could sit where I sit and see the difference in the eyeballs of people when they're sitting across from you. Today, these folks had it already planned. They had put down, I think it was 18 years ago, they came in and made their pre-planning. So most of it was already done. If you come in and start from scratch, we can surely do that. But oh, the questions we have to ask on this sheet that you sitting there right now could give us the answers to. And I've sat with children trying to figure out, oh, what was my mother's maiden name? What was my grandmother's name? How far through school did my mom go? And their hearts are broken and their heads are tired and they're weary and they're having to come up with all these answers. They look at me like, please don't ask. But I have to, because you have to have a death certificate. And those are the questions that they ask on a death certificate. So if you could just take a few minutes now or later and drop it by to me or to whoever you want to be your funeral provider, that would just be so much help to everybody. Can you prepay? Absolutely you can. Let me tell you a little bit how we do that in the state of Tennessee. Let's say we put you together my time's about up, a $3,000 cremation package. You can come in and prepay that, and you're guaranteed it never costs you any more. The other good part of that is if it's prepaid, if we mark it irrevocably assigned, if you ever have to go into long-term care, the nursing home can't touch that because it's set aside only for your funeral. Those are the reasons to do it. But as far as having to do it for us to take care of you, and there are some companies out here going around that want to tell you you must do it and you must do it right now. And I'm sorry, because that's not true. I had a gentleman who was comparing, and this is a company who just comes into our town just to sell cremations, and they have the right to do that. But he said, I don't know why they keep pushing this and making people so afraid. But he said, why should I come and see you? And I said, well, the main reason I would tell you, we're both going to get your body cremated. We're both going to do it legally. But I'm sitting right here in the middle of your village. If it's good, I'm here for you to come and say, thank you so much, that was good. If something goes a little bit crazy, I'm still sitting right here in your village. So that's what I want you to know, whether you choose to use Click Funeral Home or not. I'm here for you if you have any questions. And I think now we're all going to be up here. If y'all want to come join me, we'll just pass the mic around. And I think there's some people going to have microphones in the it's congregation. If it's church, I guess it's the crowd. And if you have a question, just raise your hand. They'll bring it to you. Okay. Whose turf is organ donation, and how does that work in the cremation or in the burial process? And I'm so glad you asked that question. What happens if you die in a hospital? We cannot even go to the hospital and pick up your body till somebody talks to donor services. Okay? And what happens, you go home from the hospital, and you're tired and you're weary, and you go to bed, or you unplug the phone, or you see this number keep coming up on your caller ID, and you're like, I'm not going to answer it, I don't know it, because it doesn't say organ donation, it says something else. You don't answer the phone. They're trying to call you to get permission. If you have not given permission, yea or nay, at the hospital, then donor services is trying to call you. You're not answering the phone, and nothing's happening. The body is just staying at the hospital. In the morning, you get up and call and say, do you have my wife yet? Nope. They've never called because you haven't talked to donor services. So even if it's written on a driver's license or whatever, you have to talk to donor services. And we can't do anything until they're through with whatever. Some cases they take to Nashville to take bones and skin and different things and eyes. Some they can do here locally. But all that has to happen before you ever get to the funeral home. Is that a good answer? You still got to talk to somebody. The next of kin still has to talk to somebody. They can't do it just on a driver's license or on everything that you have. Well, I'm telling you, it's general for we who all made this meeting today, that you got to talk to them. Okay?
How many death certificates should we ask for?
It just totally depends. If you still have property and you own a lot of assets, you probably want to get, we usually say 5 to 7 to start with. In the state of Tennessee, it's not hard to get more. Okay, they're $15 a piece, and in some states it takes a long time. We are now totally electronic in our death certificate system. So if you get your first 5 and you're down to the last one, you still have some business to do, you call me, I'll have them for you tomorrow. So I would rather you have fewer and need more than a drawer full at $15 a piece.
If you're from out of state, as we all are, and you've come here with a will or a trust that was drafted in another state, is there anything that you should or need to do to make it compliant with Tennessee?
Yes, sir.
That's, of course, a very good question, and my policy is, yes, you need to have it looked at, whether we need to do anything or not.
Loren, he has to repeat the question. So he could...
I didn't follow my own rule, did I, Jamie? The question is, if you have an estate plan from another state, does it need to be looked at here? And I just say, yes, let's look at it. If it's fine, you know, then there's nothing to be done. I've made a friend talk to you. We've had a cup of coffee, and that's all. But if there are states whose statutes on how to properly sign a will are not the same as ours. And so therefore you can save your executors a whole lot of hassle just to have it looked at to see if it's Tennessee compliant or not. Generally, when you have a trust, we will do at least a short amendment to say that the trust is now governed under the Uniform Trust Code in the state of Tennessee. Again, we're making things easier for your successor trustees or for your loved ones to come and do the business that has to be done once you pass.
Does Tennessee allow the ladybird deed on your property?
I'm sorry, ma'am, does Tennessee allow what?
Ladybird deed.
Thank you. You know, that was a term I learned only a year or so ago, so no, ma'am, we don't. I understand Michigan does, and that is a neat way to transfer your property in Michigan to your revocable trust. But, and for the audience to know, a ladybird deed is it's an instrument how you own your home, whether it's you or you and your spouse, and then give the property to somebody after you die, whether it's your trust or your kids or whomever. But in Tennessee, we do have property that can be owned via a life estate. But I don't recommend those except in very, very unusual circumstances, because in a life estate, just you as the current owner continue to own your home, but what's called the remainderman, whomever you want to have the property once you pass, they're now the remainderman. Therefore, they have an interest in your property. So should you ever want to sell your home and downsize, or should you ever want to get a home equity line of credit to put in that elevator that you now need, whoever you have named as your remainderman have to sign the instruments with you in Tennessee. Okay? Does, you know, all your kids agree? It's all good. No issues there. But what if one of your children die before you, and now that deceased child's share has flowed down to his or her children who are minors? You're stuck going to court, folks. So there's better ways to handle avoiding probate for your real estate, and that would be the revocable trust route.
Going back to the will, what about the healthcare power of attorney and financial power of attorney from another state? Do you have to get those redone in Tennessee like the will, or are they okay from other states?
Whether a healthcare power of attorney or a financial power of attorney, whether they're technically valid or not, generally we redo those because, again, we're wanting to make life easier for those agents of yours that's going to come along, and you're now incapacitated. So we don't want your financial agent or your healthcare agent to have an issue because some facility doesn't want your out-of-state document. Yes, there are laws in place that in the United States, healthcare documents are reciprocal, but when you're getting to these end-of-life questions and who's got right over decisions to be made, you really don't want an issue at that point in time for your healthcare agent. And with the financial powers of attorney, because in today's world of identity theft and fraud and elder abuse, the more recent those are, the better. The less problem your financial agent is going to have if it's a Tennessee document and if it's within the last 5 years. Because if you take to Ben's office a Michigan power of attorney that was created 12 years ago, where does that have to go, Ben, to be reviewed?
We would have to send that document to our home office, and it could take some time to get an answer. To Loren's point, things could be typically worked around, but it's just you're going to time and money on waiting to get things approved. So what we typically do is ask for a review with Loren to make sure that things are applicable for the state of Tennessee.
If we have a cemetery plot in Massachusetts, what do we have to go through in order to get our cremated returns sent there?
I didn't hear the last part.
What do we have to go through to get the cremated returns sent to?
Okay. Cremated remains can only be sent via U.S. mail. So what we would do, if that's what you want to do, is have your cremated remains buried in Massachusetts. The funeral home would call the cemetery there, make all those arrangements, and mail those cremains unless somebody's going. It makes me feel a whole lot better to put the cremains under somebody's arm and send it with them than it does in the mail. But I've never lost any in the mail. It just, I'm always a little bit squeamish when we put them in the mail, but they have to go overnight and they're very secure, but we would definitely get them to your cemetery plot.
This is a question for Ms. McCullough. I think I heard you say you had a $3,000 cremation package. What's involved in a $3,000 cremation package?
Okay, a direct cremation is $1,995, and that's our very basic one. And that's where we would pick up the body wherever you pass away, get all the needed forms and everything filed, have the cremation done, and bring the cremated remains back to the next of kin. That's a $1,995. If you have a service in a church, and we go there and take care of that service, and we're just here from like 2 hours before till 2 hours after and do all that, sort of like a wedding planner, then it takes it to $2,890. So that's where, then you're going to have additional things like death certificates if you choose to run an obituary, if you order flowers for your service. That's how it can get to $3,000.
If you prepay for cremation, and then before my husband and I, either one of us passed, we ended up down with one of our children, living closer to them in a different state. Does the prepaid cremation, is it effective wherever that would be?
Very good question. Let me explain. Yes, the short answer is yes. And that's the reason why if you came in and prepaid a cremation with us, you will actually get a life insurance policy in the mail at your home. I will get a copy of it too in my office. Let's say you paid $2,000 for a direct cremation. And if you die here with us, we promise it never goes up and it would be taken care of. If you're in Florida, it wouldn't be higher, but if you're in California living with your kids and you die out there, you have that policy to take with you to any funeral home. That policy, if you put $2,000 into it, it grows at 1.25% interest a year. So you have that policy plus any growth to take anywhere that you want to. Okay, we can't guarantee they'll charge you no more because we're not in charge of their prices. But that's how that works. But yes, and we're not part of any big conglomeration, so you don't have to use a particular funeral home. That's yours to take with you anywhere. Does that answer your question?
Some of the veterans in the village are with a company called Neptune Society. Does your path cross with them sometimes? Is there anything that you do to progress this? Because the cremains or the burial would be out at one of the national cemeteries or the state cemeteries.
Okay, Neptune Society is very much to themselves. They're a brokerage company out of Middle Tennessee. They're down in Franklin, I believe, and they will take care of making sure the cremation happens. So they don't especially like the big bad funeral home. They kind of sort of think we're trying to take advantage of people. Our costs are the same. And I have had families come to me and say, I don't believe I want to do that. I want to come with you. And I contacted Neptune, and they will pay a funeral home a very small percentage of what the people have paid in if you change over to a funeral home. So if you started with Neptune, it's best for you financially to stay with Neptune. Like I say, they are not, that was one of my answers, they are not local. So if you have an issue of some kind, you're calling a number somewhere, but that's okay. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That's just the difference. So they don't work a lot with us. As far as getting to a national cemetery, absolutely. Last October, I even got to go to Arlington to watch a burial there, and that was an awesome experience because I was always telling people how it happened, and I didn't have a clue how it really happened, and I wanted to go watch it happen. So we will help you get, I have a funeral home in Arlington that works with us if we send a body or cremated remains to Arlington that will go and take them and those kinds of things. Is that what you were asking? Okay. No, Lisa, do you still have a question, ma'am? Lisa, this lady here, she's had her hand up here in the blue. You said you can give the cremated remains to an individual. Yes, ma'am, we can give the You can just take the box and hand it. Absolutely, that's what I do. You can give, her question is, can I just give the cremated remains to an individual? Yes. Once I have the cremated remains back, whoever signs that form saying that they are the responsible person, a spouse if you have it, or 5 children if you have them, they tell me on that form who they want me to give them to. Once I give them to you, it's up to you what you do with them. Some people put them on the mantle. Right, some people do. Some people scatter them in the Smoky Mountains. Some people put them in Tellico Lake. I'm just telling you what I know.
Are there any out-of-pocket expenses for a retired military for cremation that want to be buried in military or out of state, a military cemetery?
Okay, the benefits, unless you're retired with a disability of any kind, then there are more benefits. But a benefit would be you can go to the state cemetery or the national cemetery. For the veteran, there's no charge whatsoever. The one we have closest is in Knoxville. It's beautiful. It's out on John Sevier Highway. Sometime if you have an hour, couple hours, because it's an hour there and an hour back to kill, though, it would be nice to ride out. It's a beautiful facility. For the veteran, there's no charge. That includes either an in-ground burial or a columbarium burial. It includes a marker and a foot marker. And then for the spouse, it's like $175 for the cremains to be buried. So if anybody's entitled to it, I wish they would use it or at least check it out. Then besides that, you get the flag, you get the ceremony, and those things. But no money benefit that I know of unless you're receiving disability.
My husband and I have healthcare proxies, and we're each the other one's proxy. But what happens if we're in a terrible car accident and we're both incapacitated? Should we have some kind of a secondary person, or would it automatically go to our children, or what happens in that situation?
Thank you. That's a very good question. The question is, what happens if you have a primary health care agent but no alternates? And unfortunately, without an alternate health care agent, if you all were in that common car wreck, one was in one ER and the other was in another ER, and there was no one else to sign, and there's decisions that need to be made, with the exception of life or death decisions that the hospital will allow your kids to make. But let's say there's long-term care decisions that have to be made. We'd have to do the conservatorship. So I'm always pressing my clients, give me your primary and a first alternate and a second alternate. If you've got 6 kids, I'll put them all on the form. It's so very important to have an A or B, because none of us are promised tomorrow. You know, the crazy deer out on the parkway could get any of us, and they're just, it's good to have a plan. And so many, I'm sorry, sir, I'm on a roll now. So many of our loved ones here in the village, they don't have extended families, or they may not have children. This is a blessed place. I have got neighbors, friends, you know, boat partners on healthcare documents, our pastors sometimes, our preachers' wives. There's someone here that will help you. You just have to reach out, because if there is no one to make a decision for you that you've given that permission to, then it's only the court that can do that. Yeah. Yes, sir?
Okay, 2 of us have gone to the hospital and we're both dying. Yeah. But where are the documents that let them know who to call to find out there's a secondary individual? How do we carry documents with us that they would be able to find, or where would we? I'm not sure what format they would be in that would make it readily available to somebody who sees that we're both dead, and they're going to go look through our records somewhere so they can find out who to speak to for a secondary.
I'm sorry, sir, is your question like, how do you get your contact information out there if you're deceased, or if you're...
Yes.
All right, if you're deceased, then the EMTs here particularly know where to look, and they want you to put your contact information in the freezer or on your refrigerator.
This happens in California, somewhere. We're in a car accident.
If you have my little card, you put your little card in your pocket. Or the ice. You know, right, or the ice on your phone. Some people say yes, some people say no, you know. But if you have the little card that says my arrangements have been pre-planned, first thing we usually get when somebody dies is their wallet. And we would know then to call at least that funeral home. Then I could pull that, and you've already told me who I was in charge. If you've died, we'll go from there. If you have not died, then you go back to Loren.
Right, then you're, again, trusted people, whether it's a neighbor or whether it's your family members or your best friend, somebody needs to know where your documents are. Because again, if you're in the car wreck and you're both in the ER, there's somebody that needs to know where the documents are that may be needed. Oh yes, I always have a copy for my clients, of course, and many times we have responded to one case in particular. I recall a son who was the healthcare agent was in California. Mother was here. She fell. She had a brain concussion. You know, she couldn't tell anybody anything. But a neighbor who called 911 knew to call the son. The son didn't have any documents. He knew to call me, and we faxed the healthcare powers of attorney to the hospital. So when there's a loving community like this, when there's a will, there's a way to get it done. Some of my clients keep their documents in their glove box. I mean, it's just your own comfort level and how it works for you.
Well, I'm Julie Best, and that seems to be that our questions are winding down. On behalf of Stay in Teleco, we want to thank them for making this possible. Aren't we blessed to have these professionals right here at our disposal? So thank you. They will be in the narthex if you have specific questions. One of the documents given to you today was a feedback form. So if you would fill that out, leave it on the pew as you exit today. We want to thank Mark Powell back there in the sound booth. He makes these things look easy, and we appreciate his good work.